In this video, we'll look at using cursors to manage result sets created by a select statement that is producing multiple rows. A result set is a set of rows generated by a SQL statement, such as select. Now you're going to manage this result set by using a database cursor. So the result set is on the database server side. The cursor you'll create and use in your program. Genero supports sequential and scrollable cursors. Now a sequential cursor allows you to look through the rows one at a time, beginning to end, and scrollable allows you to navigate within the result set as needed. The scope of reference of a cursor is modular, so a cursor declared in one module cannot be referenced in another module. Now in your program, you have a connection established to a database server. And you can set up a cursor, here we'll call the cursor C1, by using the declare statement. So we're going to declare C1 from a particular select statement. Now the declare statement sets up the select statement on the database server side, allocating resources, and the SQL text is then sent to the database server for parsing, validation, and to create an execution plan. So at this point you have a prepared statement on the database server side. Now once we've declared the cursor, we can go ahead and open the cursor, and the open instruction executes the SQL statement, and a result set is produced on the server side. So at this point we can fetch the rows, but they haven't been fetched over to our program as of yet. Then in the code we can use the fetch statement to fetch a row from the result set into our buffer. Here it's a set of variables. It might be a record in your program. Now if we have declared the cursor to be a scroll cursor, we can use some additional options to navigate in that result set. So we can fetch previous, we can fetch first or last, we can fetch to an absolute position in the result set, given that the result set rows start at 1, or we can fetch relative to the current position of the cursor in the result set. Now we can also close and free the cursor. So if we wanted to close the cursor, closing the cursor would release the resources allocated to the result set. So if we close C1, we are releasing the result set. Now at this point we could open the cursor again, which would execute that prepared statement again and create a new result set. So we can reuse the declared cursor by reissuing an open statement. Now when we execute the free statement, it will release resources allocated to the prepared statement. So once we've freed a cursor, we cannot reopen it. We'd have to declare it once again. Now to summarize the steps we used to use the cursor, first thing was to declare the cursor or declare a scroll cursor. Now that simply sets up a prepared statement on the database server side based on the select that you have established for that cursor. Then opening the cursor executes that prepared statement and sets up the result set. Then you can browse through the rows in the result set using either for each, which we'll look at on the next slide, or the standard fetch statement, which allows you to just fetch one row at a time from the result set. Then closing the cursor simply closes the result set on the database server side. So at this point you can execute the open statement again, which will re-execute that prepared statement. So closing the cursor or using the close statement simply releases the result set, but keeps your cursor declared, so you can reopen it. Then last, freeing the cursor frees the resources allocated to the cursor. So if the cursor has been closed and the cursor has been freed, then if you wanted to use that cursor again, you would have to redeclare the cursor. Now the for each statement is a helpful statement because it's used to retrieve and process the rows from the result set. The for each block performs successive fetches until all the rows specified by the select are retrieved. Now, when using the for each statement, the cursor is automatically closed when the loop is done. So when we look at an example, we'll see that the for each loops through each of the rows in the result set and then automatically is closed when a not found or a SQLCA SQL code 100 is detected. So the for each is really the equivalent of using the open, fetch, and close instructions and gives you a simple way of processing through the result set. Now let's take a look at this code example and talk a little bit about the open using clause and the fetch statements into clause. The first thing we have here is two variables defined. K is an integer and N is a varchar. Now in this declaration of a cursor, you can see that we are supplying a select statement that has a input parameter option here. So if we are declaring a cursor on a select statement that's going to be dynamic SQL, in other words, it contains placeholders, we're going to need to open that cursor with the using clause and supply that value or values. So here we've declared C1 cursor from this select statement where cust ID is greater than the placeholder. We're going to let K equal 102 and then we're going to open the cursor using K. So the statement that is executed is select cust name from customer where cust ID is greater than 102. Then we can fetch into a variable. We're going to fetch the first row into N, and N was our varchar because what we're selecting is the cust name, and that's varchar. So we fetch the first row into N. Then what we're doing is simply changing K to 103, and we're issuing another open statement. Now we're going to open the cursor using K, which is now 103, and the statement that is executed uses the 103 for the placeholder, and again we get a different result set. And then here we're just simply fetching the first row into N. So fetch C1 into N is just we're using our variable. So again, if you are using dynamic SQL where you're supplying placeholders in your statements, you need to make sure that you use the using clause and supply the variable that you'll be supplying to the select statement.